Okay, so let us start.
Ah,
So,
Good evening, everybody.
good evening, everyone.
Uh,
So, welcome everyone to this Hindustan Republican Global Online event. So, today we have with us Angshuman Gangopa ji, and the topic with which we will be discussing is the ethos and effect of the Azad Hind Government and Azad Hind Revolution led by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose in run-up to the liberation of Bharat. So let me introduce Angshuman ji with you all. Angshuman ji is a former research scholar under Zoological Survey of India and is currently the assistant editor of Swastik, a Bengali nationalist weekly. So he will be enlightening us with some nuances about the Azad Hind Revolution and the Azad Hind government and how it helped our country in the liberation. So over to you, Angshuman ji.
Thank you, everybody. Uh, Wishing all a very happy and prosperous Holi and Yolu Yatra ahead. We are right now living in. Should I
Yeah, continue.
continue? Uh,
Mhm.
we are right now living in the year 2024, and we are going to commemorate uh, none but stalwart and solemn leader Netaji, like Netaji Subhash Chandra, uh, who has been the liberator of India, who has been the emancipator of the oppressed. And we are going to commemorate him and the legacy of Azad Hind that we had celebrated on its 75th years of completion in the year 2018. And when did the legacy actually begin? When did the legacy actually, uh, since the inception of it, we are lying to highlight the ideology behind the setting up of Azad Hind government, behind the formation of a military regime like Azad Hind Force, that we also known as Indian National Army, under the command of Netaji Subhash Chandra. He has been the national leader. He has formed a government of which he has been the president and the prime minister. And after a very long period of time, when actually he set up all that, we owned up the legacy of Azad Hind in run up to the celebration of 75th years of independence. Right now, we are living in the Azadi Ki Amrit Kal, and in this Amrit Kal, we need not forget the contribution of Azad Hind personals, the government, which had its ministers, army personals, volunteers, women regiment, secret service, even civil administration under it. So we need to have a thorough understanding of how the government actually formed, how it functioned, how it gives its legacy to us, and the forerunners of the government after 1945. The relevance of establishment of Azad Hind need to be studied, need to be researched thoroughly, and the contribution of the souls that have died towards the liberation of our motherland needs to be commemorated. They should get their due as well. Now, on the historical pretext, I would like to begin with uh, certain references and The discussion shall not be quite boring, and I am trying to put up some interesting points right from the pages of history towards you, before you. That is, what is actually, as per or according to Netaji, the total mobilization. He was giving the clarion call towards the liberation of India. He was aging for a movement, for an all out movement to oust the British regime right from our motherland. For that, he has to have a escape from his own home, and he has to go over all the way to Germany to set up a free legion that is known as Indian Legion. And after the establishment of the Indian Legion, he was right there to meet Hitler and pursue him about the liberation of India. The plan was not quite feasible to Hitler as well. Hitler seemed to be quite reluctant to help Netaji, but later, over several meetings, the matter actually transpired a lot. At that time, Netaji Subhash Chandra was planning to have a secret service. Before the establishment of his own government that is going to form, that is going to plan, he has got his ideals to form an Indian form of secret service. This is the first kind of secret service that has been launched from Berlin by Netaji. For that, he picked up some Indian persons who were right there in living abroad. Their no name was the name has have been Dr. N.G. Swami, Dr. Pavitra Mohan Rai. Persons like them was picked up by none other than Netaji, and he got his personnel trained by Aber. What is Aber? Aber is a German secret service agency. He got his personnel trained through Aber. And when the plan was actually designed, that how Netaji will go over Eastern Asia and reach Tokyo from all the way from Berlin. Three routes were being selected. There is a sea route, another is a land route, and another is a air route. For every route, there was danger. There was the routes were actually circumferred by British Army, by Anglo-American forces. They were actually guarding those areas. And if Netaji go over to Tokyo or Singapore or Asia from Berlin, there is a possibility of being caught or being captured by the Anglo-American forces. So he first sent his own personals to scrutiny, to raking all the routes, that which routes will be feasible for Netaji to move towards Asia from Berlin. For that, the security personnel recruited by Netaji under the aegis of Indian Legion, they went over all the Asia, Europe sea routes, and for air, they also scrutinized the viability, and even the land route, if it is possible for Netaji to move through land. They checked all that, and finally the report was submitted to Berlin Free India Center that the sea route shall be more feasible, and it can be covered, it can be guarded if Netaji travels under the uh, in the way of a submarine. And the German U-boat was actually prepared and launched at the port of Kiel, and Netaji boarded the submarine and left Berlin, left Germany for the all way to Asia. And at the Madagascar, he actually got transferred to the Japanese ship. And on June 1943, he arrived at the Tokyo. And before Netaji's arrival in Tokyo, we need to discuss that from February to March 1942, Rashbihari Bose, who has been a great patriot and a great revolutionary, uh, from 1916 to 1917, he was living in Japan. He was trying to set up an army uh, that the undermanned and the war prisoners of Indian Army, British Indian Army, that was kept under the uh, prison of Japanese. He was actually trying, Rashbihari Bose was trying to set up and to form an army uh, with the help of those prisoners. And from 1942, he was continuously on his approach to convince Japanese personnel, Japanese ministers, and the then Japanese government that if the army can be set up and in the form of Indian Independence League, uh, then the Independence League shall be uh, in cooperation with the Japanese. Uh, we'll try to liberate India and we'll try to help the Axis powers, Axis forces as well. And for that, an undercover setup and communication with Netaji, who was there in Berlin, was actually maintained with Rashbihari. And when Netaji arrived Tokyo, then Rashbihari actually stepped down and he transferred his power of Indian Independence League to Netaji Subhash Chandra. And Netaji Subhash Chandra became the first president of Indian Independence League in 1943. And he actually uh, was or has been uh, in favor of waging a total war. That is, I referred earlier, that is the total mobilization, the total war against the Allied power. Allied power comprises of its Anglo-American forces, Anglo-American powers, who has been the colonizers across the globe, looting the resources, plundering the human population across the globe, creating all kind of menaces. So Netaji decided to form an army and to form a government on the principle of unity, faith, and sacrifice. As the Ittihad, Itmad, and Qurban. This has been his motto, this has been his ideology. And the first appreciation he got from Germany and then from Japan. Later on in 1943, uh, on the auspicious day of uh, Kali Puja and Deepavali, the day has been 21st October 1943. He pursued the swearing-in ceremony of himself as the president, as the prime minister, as the minister of war, and the minister of foreign affairs of Azad Hind Government at the Cathay Hall, is a kind of cinema hall in Singapore. And Azad Hind Government was formed, and the oath was taken by all the ministers. S.A. Iyer became the Minister of Broadcasting and Telecommunication. Mr. M. Sohai, Anandamon Sohai, has been the Chief Secretary of the government. Colonel Lakshmi Shaminathan was the Minister of Women Department. that is known as Rani Jhansi Regiment. Generals Mr. Saigal, Colonel A.C. Chatterjee, Devnath Das, Mr. Thivi, Leo Puchendi, and M.Z. Kiani, Tanwaj Khan, Aziz Ahmed. These are the military personnel, generals, colonels, and ministers occupying several ministries and departments under Azad Hind Government. The address of Netaji after he got swearing in 1943, 21st October, as the head of the state of Free India. The swearing in, after swearing in, he was asked certain questions by journalists present over there. What kind of questions he got faced? He faced a question when he was asked that, is your government will be a democratic government? Will you love or prefer democracy when you run your own administration across Asia or across India? Netaji replied that which government across the globe is actually truly democratic in nature? Then the journalist got overwhelmed by the question Netaji asked. Netaji went on replying that, well, in a way, it's a democracy. Democratic nature to which a government is likely or should function or should be functioning should be upheld across the globe. But no government in recent or present times is truly democratic. Democracy is a thing that is hard found across the globe. This was the version of Netaji. Those people who advocates or who uh, propagates a lie about Netaji, that Netaji was a kind of military dictator. Netaji preferred dictatorship over democracy. It's a lie. Netaji always loved democracy. In Manipura Congress, in the parliament, national parliament held in 1938, presidential speech of Netaji, he preferred democracy above all. Anyway, we are right now discussing the Azad Hind government. All that Azad Hind government brought across East Asia is the Azad Hind revolution. And what has the Azad Hind revolution been? That is a kind of revolution that should be working up inside India. And for that, Congress could be an instrument, but Congress was kind of a hopeless object across India in 1943. The second part was carrying on an effective propaganda among Indian troops on the enemy side. That is the British Indian Army, which consists of or comprised of some Indian persons, Indian military persons, Indian Jawans. Within them, effective propaganda needed to be carried out towards the liberation of motherland. Third one, the third part of the revolutionary agenda has been putting forward fresh efforts to solve the problems on the home front, particularly the problems pertaining to supplies and transport. And we need to understand that on which front the war could be launched when cabinet was called upon by Netaji and he asked his ministers, then how can the India be liberated? On which front we should launch our war? The first and foremost frontier that his minister advised him was the northwestern frontier. With the help of Russia, with the help of Russia, we need to launch the war from the way of Afghanistan, and through Russia, our troops will be coming to Afghanistan, and from Afghanistan, we will be from Chitral, Gilgit, and from northwestern province, that is right now known as Pakistan, northwestern province, we should be launching our war. Then the scenario was quite changed during the Second World War, that the Russia went on joining the Allied power, the Allied forces. So it was not quite feasible to launch the front of northwestern province or the Khyber province to liberate India or to, in a wake of liberation of India. Then the second plan was drafted and beautifully crafted by Netaji to launch the war from the northeastern part of India. And northeastern part, for that, Japanese occupied territory like Rangoon, like Singapore, and other eastern part of Asia will be helpful to provide a launch pad for the Indian National Army or other than Fauj to have an entry towards the from the northeastern part of India. For that, Netaji was having a very scanty military aid or resources. For that, Netaji was having only 66 tanks to fight against the British, to fight against the Anglo-American Allied power. Only 66 tanks to liberate the Indian soil, to liberate the Indian territory. For any kind of military preparation to liberate for the liberation of India, 6,000 tanks, even 6,000 tanks was uh, is uh, insufficient, and only 60 by the help of only 66 tanks. So Netaji went on to mobilize his own troops. He didn't have any air power or aircraft, military aircraft. So air he didn't have, and only land, only what should I say? Uh, Military words it's known as uh, armed personnel. Means anyway, is the armed personnel not having the program for the liberation of India? And towards the wake up of the liberation, the first territory it has conquered or it got liberated was the Andaman Nicobar Islands. On November 1943, Azad Hind Government liberated Andaman Nicobar Islands. Netaji went there. He appointed Mr. Loganathan as the governor of liberated Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Netaji renamed the said islands as Shohid and Swaraj Islands. And Netaji visited physically the cellular jail in Andaman. Netaji liberated the prisoners kept therein. The marching song of Azad Hind has been Kadam Kadam Bada Hai. The marching song is not quite encouraging but inspiring as well. It inspires every Indian youth, every Indian military personnel towards their dedication of their motherland. And when it is the matter of fierce battle to wage war against the British, Azad Hind army or Indian National Army went on to defeat British in the frontier of Imphal and Kohima. On the day of 14th April 1944, Colonel Shaukat Malik, appointed by Netaji Subhash Chandra, we defeated the total Anglo-American forces deployed all across the Nagaland and Manipur to win over Imphal. And how the British army actually defeated and how the Imphal actually liberated. The fall of Imphal, how it was actually done. It was done through a kind of surgical strike process. It was a surgical strike actually. The first ever surgical strike of Indian Army. This is no this is known probably as the total mobilization. Limited resources that Netaji had. Limited supply chain did it that his army got followed. He didn't have the second option to launch the second front, to launch his troops on the sacred soil of India. Along with the pursuance of war, the Second World War, against the frontier of India, in Northeast India, Azad Hind Government launched his National Bank of Azad Hind Limited. And for the any kind of military movement, for any kind of movement of civil administration and government, it needs money. The nationalized bank set up under his own government was taking care of all the funds collected during the war. And the provisional government was having, like I said, the Rani Jhansi regiment, which Netaji said on that point, I have no doubt in my mind that when they are sent into action, they will conduct themselves in a manner which will bring honor and glory to India and Indian women. This was the vision of Netaji. First ever Indian women regiment, and perhaps the first ever women regiment across the Asia, was dreamt and formed by Netaji Subhash Chandra. Some problems arose when Netaji's troops crossed borders in March 1944. And for that, to maintain the supply chain and to have a kind of military basis of his own civil administration running from Rangoon, the organization called the Azad Hind Dal, through it primarily a civilian organization, was organized and formed by Netaji Subhash Chandra so that it can work under wartime conditions and face the same hardship and danger as members of our fighting forces, of the fighting forces of Azad Hind Government. This was the precursor. The Azad Hind Dal was the precursor of Indian National Army when the army actually moved into the Indian territory. The main tasks of Azad Hind Government towards fulfilling of those tasks, some objective was laid down by Netaji Subhash Chandra. That I said that working up the revolution inside India, or to infiltrate into India in a slow and secret service manner, and to having formed some groups within Congress and outside Congress to carrying out active propaganda among civilian Indians, and the Indian troops on the enemy side, putting forward fresh efforts to solve the problems on the home front, particularly the problems pertaining to supplies and transport. And third one is on November 1943, there has been a conference. Hello, there has been a conference uh, organized in Tokyo. The conference was known as the East Asia Conference. And in the East Asia Conference, Azad Hind Government took its participation. Netaji Subhash Chandra, the Indian head of the state, participated in Indian East Asia Conference. Prior to the East Asian Conference, 18 countries or 18 states or the head of the states gave their respective assents or recognitions towards the Indian National Army and Azad Hind Government. The states has been the Nazi Germany, the Vichy France, the Soviet Socialist Republic of Russia, the Croatia, the Ireland under the aegis or leadership of Imonti Valera, the government of Manchukuo, the government of Manchuria, the government of Thailand, and several other small governments or states gave respective recognition to Netaji-led Azad Hind government. Thereafter, on the part of East Asia Conference, Netaji wrote or Netaji highlighted the points of administration and reconstruction of Asia. When the Anglo-American forces will flee or will be forced to flee from Asia, how the Asians will be guided, will be administered, how the reconstruction will be done. This was the entire planning drafted and put forward by Netaji in the wake of East Asia Conference 1943. In the chapter of liberated area, that Netaji sorry for the interruption, very sorry.
No, carry on.
Netaji formed a war committee within his cabinet. And the war committee was actually planning to reach out to a solution to the problems pertaining to propaganda, revolutionary activity, administration, and the reconstruction of their territory. Liberated area, how the liberated area should be administered, how Indian civilians of the liberated area should be taken care of, was the priority of the ministers and advisors of Azad Hind government. Third part has been the Anglo-American forces planning to gain control over the territories they have lost. And for that, Azad Hind Army or Indian National Army actually fought not against only British, but the Anglo-American army actually comprised of the armies of Canada, Australia, Britain, France, America, and even Holland, Netherlands. and defend other states on the side of Allied power. Truth mobilization has been an effective and priority part of Azad Hind government. But the supply chain, heavy rainfall, the disruption of supply chain, heavy rainfall, malarial outbreak, and dehydration. These are the main. This has been the main factors or main obstacles before the Indian National Army through and through. Even Netaji urged indirectly Mahatma Gandhi to have an all-out movement across India when he was pervading or impervading throughout the Northeast. And for that, he tried to send a signal or kind of message to the then Congress leadership. He named the three brigades of Indian National Army before Nehru Brigade, Gandhi Brigade, and two brigades actually he named before Nehru and Gandhi. For future struggle and achievement of independence, Netaji planned everything. Netaji planned our Indian anthem, the Indian national song. He designed Indian national flag as well. He gave the first constitution of India through which his government actually was running. He gave the first Indian army, which was known as Indian National Army. He gave the first provisional government running from exile. And in cooperation of the Nippon army, that is the Japanese army, he was able to achieve some military goals and achieve his targets throughout different points of Indian border. For Indian troops or for his own troops, he propounded some medals, military medallions like Sardar-e-Jung and other medallions that was given to civil military personnel to inspire them. Like nowadays, Indian Army gives medals, military medallions to fellow Indian personnels, military personnels for having military achievements. That was the thing was actually pioneered by Netaji. His government's attitude towards the countrymen outside India, that is the Indian diaspora living outside India, was was quite memorable as well. The administration running outside India or Indian territory, the administration within Indian territory was the thing to be studied, to be researched. And within the China, even within the China, he's got his own setup. Within the Manchuria, China, these are the areas within which his secret network was actually prospering. And even in 1945, Aladdin government was actually planning to have a second option when the war ends, when the war actually when the Second World War, if the Second World War ends, then how the government will function. Because if Japanese armies or Axis powers falls or surrenders before the Allied power, what will be the option for the government or the other than government to run? And what will happen to its own objectives to liberate India? For that, Netaji Subhash Chandra has a secret visit in Russia in January 1945 in Russia. It is for commendable, like a stalwart leader like Netaji, to have a both way kind of formation along with communist Russia and along with Nazi Germany. He was playing with both the powers, both the world powers. One is communist, the diabolically or diametrically opposite from the Nazis. Another one is the Nazis, who are waging the war against the Allied forces. And Russia has been the ally of the Allied forces. The two way he got managed. One the man is Stalin, the second man is Hitler. Two people, two men he used to manage at that time. And on this, after the secret visit of Netaji from Russia, he went all the way and he returned to Singapore and he set up a war memorial in Singapore therein, which was later dynamited, which was later actually exploded by the then Indian Viceroy Lord Mountbatten. What kind of army, what kind of government was Britain, was the British, that they actually exploded a war memorial founded by Netaji. No government actually explodes any war memorial of even his own enemy. The British did that. The morale of other than government was monitoring the situation across Eastern Asia. That what Americans trying to do, what British has got to do. They were planning to prevent Netaji from entering India with the cahoots of their in Congress. And the conspiracy was hatched in Singapore in October 1945 when Nehru went all the way with Viceroy Lord Mountbatten to have a dialogue, to have a composite dialogue in between. And there, Mountbatten convinced Nehru that if Netaji Subhash Chandra ever comes, we are going to lose the entire Asia. But you are going to lose the chair of the Prime Ministership. If Netaji comes, then the power of India shall be handed over, or all will be won over by the nationalist people. But if you want to grab or have the power, then do accordingly what we say. Nehru gave his assent to the partition of India. Partition of India was the main hindrance behind Netaji's reappearance after 1945. For a freedom-loving Indian, Netaji said, what are the alternative paths of the freedom? The first alternative is the prayer and petition, relying on the belief that the British will grant us freedom as a gift at the end of the war. Netaji ruled out this possibility. For no self-respecting Indian believes in this way any longer. The second alternative before Netaji is the policy of wait and see, trusting the belief that since the position of the British will become more and more precarious in future, they will be forced by the war like situation to accept and fulfill India's demand for liberty. Freedom will fall into our lap as per those people who are dreaming of it as a ripe fruit in the fullness of time, and Indians going to have nothing particular to do but to patiently beat their times. This alternative was also been ruled out by our head of the state, Netaji Subhash. Netaji said so often to his countrymen that the British have decided once and for all that come what may, they will hang on to India till the last. The worse their position becomes elsewhere, the more greedily will they hold on to India, believing that if India can somehow be saved for Britain, the British Empire will be saved. The third alternative before Netaji has been the path of Satyagraha or the civil disobedience, which the Indian National Congress pursuing since 1921. For this method, like civil disobedience or Satyagraha, Netaji has got no faith on. He didn't vouch for any kind of dominion status for India, but he was entirely at the behest of the entire independence, the entire freedom, the full freedom, the total freedom of India at, at the behest of his own countrymen. The fourth option that he actually opted for was the entire struggle, freedom struggle, armed battle against the British. And for that, he waged the revolution in entire East Asia with the help of Axis power like Japan. What Indian National Army actually did set up for the be then liberation movement or the Indian independence movement or the freedom struggle going on inside India. Indian National Army was actually a kind of Chinnamosta. What is Chinnamosta? Chinnamosta is an incarnation of goddess Kali. Chinnamosta cuts his own head and drinks her own blood. This is Chinnamosta. Other than army, Indian National Army actually burnt itself, actually destroyed itself for the entire what we said in Hindi is Jagaran, entire awakening. For the awakening of India, they sacrificed themselves. When the Azad Hind Army was planning to liberate India, no congressman or no henchman of Congress actually came forward in their support. Even Nehru, he went on to give a bite or give a statement that if Netaji ever comes in India in India's borders, he will have a sword to guard India and to fight against Netaji. This was their character, and this was their motto. And the second one is, after having a profound base within Congress, Netaji failed to gather the honor and being a leader, being the supreme leader of Congress. He actually failed to gather the support of other congressmen. But across Asia, across globe, across world, he gathered support by his own virtue to take on the British, to take on the Anglo-American forces, to give India, like I said, his own constitution, her own army, her own setup of administration and all that. Rajbihari Bose got demised in 1945, and the situation of war, Second World War, was actually turning to another to another direction, and the direction was rightly analyzed by Netaji Subhash Chandra. He thought, or he planned, that if the fall of Japan, if the fall of Japan ever happens, his army has to surrender. But the British forces deployed across the northeast has got no clue what Netaji Subhash Chandra or Azad Hind government was going to. The British commander, it is said that, it is not said, it is written in several books that the British commander, then commander of the Britain, who was posted in the northeast, he even signed his own surrender note, and he was going to send the surrender note to the Azad Hind government, that he, along his own army deployed in the entire northeast, is going to surrender before the Azad Hind government. But he has got no inside information of Azad Hind government, that due to the rainfall and due to the disruption of supply chain and for the outbreak of malaria and other things, the Azad Hind Fauj, the Indian National Army, is not a is not in a condition or not in a situation to launch a all-out war in April 1945. But he signed his send and note, and he was going to send. Then four betrayers who actually betrayed Netaji. The four betrayers entered the room of the Army General, of the British Army General, and they gave all the inside information of Azad Hind government and army to the British commander, and they said that don't surrender. Uh, then the British commander actually refrained from his own position, and he didn't send the surrender note. And this was the kind of debacle. This is the kind of disaster. And India was on the verge of liberation in 1945, and that will be a Akhanda Bharat that we will be getting, and we will be getting the Netaji as the head of the state, that he vouched for the Cholo Delhi, or to liberate Delhi. And it was the notion of other than government, other than army. The notion was failed, was not quite failed. Netaji didn't surrender, or his government didn't surrender before the British, but he got a treaty, a kind of ceasefire agreement with the British, and he left. He left towards the Rangoon, and from Rangoon he went to Singapore. In Singapore, he met General Sidei. General Sidei was the Japanese general posted in Singapore. He, along with General Sidei, planned a lot, that how to run the government from Japan. And there was an information that Anglo-American forces was going to attack the Tokyo, and later they hurled the nuclear bomb, the atom bomb, over Hiroshima and Nagasaki on 6th August and 9th August respectively. Fat Man and Little Boy, the two atom bombs was actually hurled over Japan. Japan was forced to surrender, and Netaji Subhash Chandra was quite concerned about his own countrymen, about his own military personnel. He gave 2 months' salary in advance to all his military personnel, to all the bureaucrats and employees of his government. And he decided to work along with Japanese army and secret service. And for that, he has got a long goal. He has got a long objective. As per his planning, he tried to reach out Tokyo through an airplane, which was allegedly crashed. Not actually crashed, allegedly crashed, right at Toihoku on 18th August 1945 from the war front of Taiwan. Netaji Subhash Chandra did actually escape, or did actually was actually vanished from the eyesight of every Indian. He was there. He didn't die. Netaji cannot die. But his ideology was actually carried out throughout the India. And British was actually forced to leave India. How? The naval mutiny happened. Indian National Army was the precursor behind the Indian naval mutiny and Indian Air Force. When Netaji left India in 1941, prior to that, in 1939, in 1940, for 2 years, he tried to communicate the then leadership of Hindu Mahasabha. And he met Savarkar physically in Bombay. With Savarkar, he planned and he urged Savarkar to recruit Indian personnel to the British Army, so that when Netaji comes and Netaji invades through the northeast or through India, then the personnel posted by Savarkar to the or recruited by Savarkar to the British Army will revolt, and British Army and British government potentially falls within India. This was actually the planning. As per the planning, Netaji Subhash Chandra sent his from Netaji Subhash Chandra under incognito sent his own personnels in boats to India, and five five missions. The five missions were actually failed. On the sixth mission, the people Netaji sent to India was able to have a inroad to form an inroad within the British Navy and in British Army, and in different naval cantonments in Bombay, Goa, and other places. Indian Navy personnel revolt against the British regime, and British government had the proper signal that it's the time to leave India. India cannot be ruled by them any further. What did with the Azad Hind personnel, with the imprisoned Azad Hind Jawans, they were kept in the army cantonments of Multan, in Barasat, Jikorgacha, and Nilganj. And the army personnel were thoroughly tortured, and they were subjected to even massacres. 26,000, more than 26,000, 6,000 other than Jawans, other than military personnel were actually died in war front towards the liberation of their motherland. And more than 30,000 Jawans and military personnel were actually killed by British in the army cantonment after September 1945. On 25th September 1945, the Nilganj massacre was actually done within the Nilganj army cantonment, where more than 5,000 other than military personnel were actually killed by gunfire and by firing squad by the British. Such history was not quite written within the pages of Indian history. We are not taught about Netaji, his army, his government thoroughly in our history books. The salient features of any government are that the government should consist or having a land administered by its own. Second one is the post and telegraph, the telecommunication it should be having. Third one is the army it should be having to guard or to defend its own territory. Fourth one is the money or the currency system it should be having. All the salient features for forming a true sovereign government was done by Netaji in the form of Azad Hind Government. The effect of Azad Hind Government, like I said, is the Devi Chinnamasta, that it killed, it sacrificed itself towards the awakening of entire Bharat, towards achieving the true sovereignty, true liberty. It is the actually the ethos of the entire freedom struggle, the result of the Indian freedom struggle that is going on since 1757 or 1857. This is the exact of it, that we get our true independence, true values, our own constitution, our own self-rule, our own sovereignty. But that, for the sake of repentance, we didn't get the India, the Bharat that Netaji dreamed. Netaji dreamed the idea of Akhanda Bharat. What Netaji left for us is the idea of Akhanda Bharat. Netaji was the head of the state, or is right now, even right now, he is the head of the state of Akhanda. The land we actually lost in the form of Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc., and like Myanmar, was the conspiracy held by the British and by the Nehru-led Congress. For them, we Indians are still deprived of Akhanda Bharat. The whole of India should be liberated as per the vision and mission of the Iswastani. We don't know, perhaps, but for that, in the year 2018, Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji did recognize the vision of Azad Hind Government. He commemorated the legacy of Azad Hind Fauj and Azad Hind Government. An INA memorial was set up and established and formed within the Lal Killa at the New Delhi. And he, Narendra Modi, renamed the Andaman Nicobar Islands as well and set up a statue of Netaji and an INA memorial there as well. The cellular jail was actually renovated, and it's a decorative renovation that Narendra Modi ji did, or his government did, in 2018. In 2022, in the year 2022, the Rajpath, the last legacy of the British colonialism in India or in Delhi, was actually renamed after Kartobya Path or Kartobya Mark. And on the Kartobya Mark, where the Republic Day ceremonial parade is actually undertaken, the statue of Netaji was unfolded or erected over there. Netaji Subhash Chandra is the liberator of India, like I said earlier, should get its due. He has been the first India's head of the state of the sovereign India. His memory cannot be faded out. His legacy cannot be undermined. His ideology cannot be forgotten. But on that contrary, Indian historians actually tried to distort the Indian history too much, that they didn't put forward or the history of Netaji Subhash Chandra, the history of INA, when discussing the modern history of India in detail. For that detailing, we need to go through certain books, certain literatures drafted by publications like Prakash and others to know or to get understood the salient features of the government, even the betrayals it faced. What kind of betrayals it faced? Loki Shamunathan, later married to Mrs. Saigal, was turned into Colonel Loki Saigal. Wasn't she a betrayer? She joined the hands of the communists in his later life. The communists of India portrayed Netaji in a bad light all the while.
So,
They published,
sorry to interrupt, Angshumanji. So you must be having lots of things to say, as you being the master of it. But we are running out of time. So if you can complete this in one or
yes,
two,
I am summarizing that the
and then we
communists
can
was
go for questions, to
published
the audience.
articles and they drew uh, cartoons of Netaji. So Loki Saigal was not having any point to join the hands of communists. Loki Saigal was even the presidential candidate against the Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam in 2020 in 20, in the year 2001. We did not forget that. The betrayal of Sanwaj Khan. The Sanwaj Khan, who was a minister under the government of Azad Hind, he is actually betrayed. And he joined the hands of Nehru to become a minister under the Nehru cabinet. And he submitted a report under the formation of his own committee, the Sanwaj committee. Then Netaji got died in a plane crash in Taihoku. He didn't even visit the Taihoku. And what Sanwaj was actually doing in Khosla Commission, he went on to having to put his own witness or to his own deponent, being a deponent before the Khosla Commission of Inquiry. He went there when asked that uh, being a chairman of your own committee, that you submitted the report that Netaji had died. Then he said, "It will be a mad person. He will be a mad person to furnish such a report." Was he was talking about himself that he is a mad person that he furnished the report. So these are the actually fishy persons within the Netaji's own cabinet who got court-martialed under Netaji before Netaji left from Taiwan. And these areas, these gray areas of Indian history, was actually buried under the carpet by the Nehru. And the last part I would have to touch, that's the looting of INA treasure. The nationalized bank of INA government was having crores and crores of money in the form of gold as well. The gold and the money was looted by the British and Nehru government in connivance with some INA personnel like the Ramaswamy brothers and Iyer. Iyer and Ramaswamy brothers were the key persons behind the looting of INA treasure. An estimate was calculated by a famous Bengali journalist called named Borun Sengupta that an amount of rupees 72,000 crores, an amount of rupees 72,000 crores was actually got looted. So this is the enormous thing. The treasure belongs to India, it belongs to Indian countrymen. The nationalized bank of INA government was actually looted. INA personnels were actually murdered, were actually killed in the British cantonment, and certain 300 the prominent INA personnels within which Sanwaj was also was also present. They were actually put forward in the Red Fort for the INA trial, and due to the trial, the overwhelming support towards the freedom or towards the release of the INA personnel was done across India, and British ultimately, after the trial, sent them to jail, and they didn't actually hang up. They didn't hang them, and they were not killed. So there was a whispering going on across India in 1946 when the INA trial was going on at Red Fort. It is known as 40 crore ki आवाज साइगल dhilo सानवाज. 40 crore ki आवाज साइगल dhilo सानवाज. So British was actually forced to flee India, not due to the struggle or freedom struggle waged by Congress, but due to the war, due to the all-out war in the way of Azad Hind Revolution waged by Netaji. When I would like to conclude with these remarks that when Mr. Attlee, the then English Prime Minister or the Prime Minister of Britain, came to India, came to free India in 1954, the then Governor of Bengal, Mr. P.B. Chakraborty, Mr. Fonibhushan Chakraborty, met him in the governor's house at Calcutta. And Mr. Fonibhushan Chakraborty, the then governor, asked Mr. Attlee, former British Prime Minister, that did British actually flee India? He said, no, no, we actually left. Then he said, uh, then why is it because of the movement unleashed by the Indian National Congress? He again said no. Then he said, what kind of impact Indian Congress having behind the Indian national freedom? Mr. Attlee said minimal. Mr. Attlee said minimal. And then Mr. P.B. Chakraborty got astonished. What kind of reply Mr. Attlee is giving? And he said that then what actually forced you to leave India? Mr. Attlee said it is because of Chandra Bose. So this has been the thing. And another thing I would like to quote that when Radcliffe mission came to India, partition of India was actually finalized, and how the transfer of power will be done, how the power will be handed to Nehru and Congress was actually finalized. Then the Secretary of State, who was actually the all in all of the Indian administration, he was called before the British Parliament. And the then British Prime Minister, Mr. Winston Churchill, asked the Secretary of State India that what we are actually hearing, we are going to transfer the power to the Indians. Is it right? Then the then Secretary of State replied to the British Parliament that it is right. what you have actually heard. We are going to transfer the power to the Indians, to the segregated political agents of the Indians. We are going to transfer the power to a pack of political rascals, to a pack of rascals actually. We are going to transfer the power to a pack of rascals, the segregated political agents of British India. So the Nehru-led Congress and other parties who has been ruling and ruining India since last 75 up to 2014, I would like to precise, they are actually the segregated political agents of British, as laid down by the British Secretary of State before the British Parliament. So this is actually the picture. Why Netaji was not highlighted in our history? Why the legacy of Azad Hind Government was not taken when our constitution was written and Indian government was formed in 1947? Why Akhanda Bharat did not take a shape? Why partition of India happened? Why India joined hands with British in the form of Commonwealth? Why Rajpath was not renamed until 2021? These are the colonial legacy, these are the colonial hangovers which Congress-led, Nehru-led Congress and communists did have and do have right now. Any kind of destruction, any kind of betrayal, they are actually willing to when it comes to India. But when it's come to Netaji, they are all silent. They are all taking their sides. They are all looting the funds of nationalized bank, other than bank formed by the government, by the Netaji. They actually denounced the currency systems. They have to denounce the constitution laid down by Netaji. They want to suppress the ideology of Netaji. Even
Okay,
the
okay,
what is
Anshumanji, let's move to audience now. So thank you for enlightening us about the ethos and effects of the Azad Hind government and Azad Hind revolution led by Netaji. So our audience must be having some questions to ask. So I will request the members of the audience to write down their questions in the chat box here. We already have one question from Rohit Kumarji. So the
what
question is
question he has
how
asked?
so how do you see Netaji shaking hands with Hitler? So even though Gandhi opposed Hitler as he was barbaric, so actually I think so one stain that one criticism that comes in the way of Netaji is his shaking hands with Hitler. So many times people say, Hitler being the barbaric, Hitler being the, killer of, millions of Jews. So how do you see personally? How do you see Netaji shaking hands with Hitler or allying with him?
This is a common question when it comes to Netaji and Hitler.
Exactly.
So what Netaji said with regard to the Indian independence or Indian liberation from the clutches of British, how he is going to liberate? He has gone to abroad
Hmm.
and he was planning to form an army. How the army could be formed or could be established? Which state will help Netaji except Russia? These were the formidable things that we need to consider right now. As a super diplomat, as a super politician, and the super observer of global politics, Netaji Subhash Chandra, well before 1940, understood that the world is going into a war. A war-like situation will prevail within 3 to 4 years, and he cautioned the Congress leadership time and again since 1935 that the world is going to enter into another world war. And within 1939, the World War was waged by Germany against the Allied power. So the Allied power was ruling India and destroying India. So there is an old maxim in political science that enemy's enemy is my friend. Following not by dint of not following the old maxim, Netaji had its own choice to pursue Russia and to gather the help of Stalin to free India. and he did that. He tried the path as well. But Stalin and communists was not actually ready to guide him or to give him a kind of army that he was actually seeking for. And for that, Netaji's visions got changed not permanently but temporarily. Like he said, that for the liberation of India, I will be ready to joining or shaking hands, even with Satan, even with मैं शैतान के साथ भी हाथ मिलाने के लिए राजी हूँ इस भारत के आजादी के लिए.
Okay.
This was the vision. He was, like I said, for all out mobilization, for all out war against the Anglo American forces and Allied power. But he advised Hitler not to break the treaty with Russia or not to invade Russia, not to attack Russia. He said that it will not be wise to have a two-front war against the Allied power. If you are going to attack, if you attack the Russia, Russia will be shaking hands, will be joining hands with the Allied power, and it will be difficult for Germany to win over the war. And his caution was actually undermined by Hitler, that he went on to assault the Russia from the front of Siberia, and such mistakes did happen in history, and the mistakes led to a debacle that finally led to the fall of Berlin. Netaji has been a super diplomat. He has nothing got to do with Hitler in the that he persuaded genocides of Jews within the concentration camps and all that. The formation and the history of concentration camps was also a part of a kind of propaganda of Allied power as well. It cannot be fully believed or entirely believed. The brutality of Hitler and his army, Nazi army, was a myth, was not quite a myth, but a kind of history as well. But that history is not a part and parcel of the Indian liberation or Indian freedom movement. That history should be taught or should be studied in separation. When it comes to the Indian freedom movement, when it comes to the capture power or grab power, they like Netaji said, that freedom is not given, it is taken. For the sake of taking power, for the sake of the liberation of motherland, we need to follow the dedicated procedure laid down by Netaji. That the enemy of the British Empire should be my technical ally. I should be joining hands with them who are waging war against British. So it is the British interest to have a state within our Indian state. For that, the stooges like Muslim League, Communist Congress, they are formed. And Netaji didn't get aligned with certain forces who are actually mouthpieces of British, stooges of British. He hated them, but he didn't express ever his anguish or anger against Gandhi or Nehru publicly. He was a so nice gentleman that after all kind of harsh statements and harsh behavior reigned over by Gandhi and Nehru and their followers, he remained within Congress. He tried his best within Congress. He gave the Planning Commission to India. He gave the idea of civil administration to India. And later, due to a temporary failure, he planned to go over abroad and form an army to wage a all-out war against British. It will be a part of Second World War, through which British will be given a blow, a massive blow, that they forced to leave India for eternity. नेताजी said, तुम मुझे खून दो मैं तुम्हें आजादी दूंगा. Don't you see that the goddess of liberty is actually crying, for your sacrifice. If you make your sacrifice, if you give your blood under the feet, under the auspicious feet of the goddess of liberty, she will give you the freedom. She will give you the she will fulfill your wishes. The sovereignty doesn't fall from the wind, doesn't fall from the sky. The sovereignty has to be achieved by any self-determining race, by any self-respecting race. Sovereignty, liberty, freedom, this kind of thing is actually achieved, is actually something which a race, which an entire nation should be struggling for. And the struggle, the path of struggle, the ideology of struggle was underlined and highlighted and established by none other than the Western. So these are the guiding principles. This should be our ideology, the ethos of Indian, every kind of movement that we are having throughout maintenance and preservation of our independence. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.
So thank you, Anshumanji, for answering the question. Also, even I have a question. So, British Prime Minister in 1947 had categorically stated that the Congress movement had minimal impact on the decision to leave India. So, they left India due to the consequences of what Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose led Azad Hind Army campaign had done. So, but after the transfer of power on 15th of August 1947, we saw something different. The efforts of Netaji and thousands of freedom fighters were undermined, and the peaceful song, you know, "De di hame azadi badi bina khadak bina dhal." We all have heard about this. This peaceful song went loud. What are your views on this? Do you feel the efforts of Netaji were undermined, or do you think that we are exaggerating things for our political benefits, for
Indian
the Western interests, etc.?
Indian people, Indian people and the diaspora of India across the globe are actually quite euphoric in nature.
Mhm.
They celebrate every kind of thing that is possible by them. And for their euphoric nature, even the partition of India was actually celebrated within them. When India, half of India, a quarter part of India was went to sleep within India, and they rose in Pakistan, and we forgot what happened to them. What kind of refugee settlement we are actually having after post independence. The transfer of power is an agreement done to confer India the dominion status through the Act of Indian Independence Act passed by the British Parliament in 1947, 16 July, was actually a treachery towards the Indian freedom movement. It's a treason to the head of the state, Indian Nehru Western. And the great betrayal done in the way of, or in the manner of having a having signed a treaty known as London Declaration, when India confirmed its presence within the British Commonwealth under the aegis of British Crown. So the London Declaration, the Commonwealth Treaty, and the Transfer of Power Treaty, these are actually binding till date on the Indian government, on which the clauses laid down has to be maintained or has to be followed by the Indian government. Such dominion status was never a dream of Netaji Subhash. Such dominion status was actually a potential barrier for India towards achieving her sovereignty. So we cannot wipe out such barriers in a while. But the nation has got enriched in last 75 years, and for last 10 years its army, navy, air force, satellite power, artificial intelligence, and all other scientific and technological tools in economic sectors, in defense sectors, and all that got developed in such a way, in such a fashion, in such a manner that right now the transfer of power, not all the clauses is actually binding upon India. They stake the power to override the clauses written under the transfer of power. That power has been achieved, or we are going to achieve. The nation is going to achieve. So we must accumulate our own power. We must accumulate our own resources. We must curb our own corruption. We must have rising our own economy to fighting against the transfer of power that Nehru and his colleagues signed along with British to have India partitioned, to state Netaji as a war criminal. This is the things, this is the crimes they actually done, they actually committed. Their sins, their crimes need to be exposed. And there are two historians like Bipan Chandra, like Sumit Sarkar, like Irfan Habib, like Romila Thapar, all the historians, paid historians, thoroughly paid historians, who wrote the history of modern history of India, wrote the history of ancient history of India. They undermined the Indian ethos, the Indian culture, the Indian legacy, the Indian ideology, and all that is Indian or Bharatiya throughout their historical texts. These paid off historians highlighted the or glorified the Mughals, the British invaders, the foreign invaders, the Nehru and Gandhi, and other fellow Congress politicians were in actually line with Nehru and Gandhi, and they glorified all them to have their own position secured in the research institutes and universities, to misguide the Indian youths, to distort the Indian philosophy and Indian history, to portray the India in a bad light, to portray in India in a bad manner, to glorify the invaders, to subjugate the Indians for eternity. This was the motto, this was the objective, this was the intention, prima facie, for these paid up historians. We must reject their history books, the books written by them. We must thoroughly reject, and we must now rewrite the Indian history of our own. And that history should be introduced at the school, college, university level to teach India, to teach Indian students, to teach Indian generations the true form of history, the original form of history as a whole. This is to be done once and for all. The new education policy framed up by the new government in 2020 should be guiding or should be actually binding for the Indian education system to get refrained from teaching the wrong version of history and to reallocate, to refurnish the true form of Indian history. It should be done. We all hope for that.
Thank you, Angshumanji. Uh, Thank you for the answers. I don't think any more questions are left being asked by the audience. So, so if anyone has any questions, you can still raise your hands. So I don't think any more questions are left. So thank you, Anshumanji. Uh,
Thanking you all for having
thank you
my presence,
thank you for enlightening us
for
about the.
for actually inviting me to
Hmm,
provide the talk on Netaji. I would like to again joining with you.
for sure,
If you all
sure,
the
sure,
points
sure.
I couldn't actually touch, other points has to be furnished or has to be clarified as well. There are
Hmm.
several points regarding other than revolution, other than government, which is less known or not known to our fellow countrymen. That should be highlighted. That should be pointed out or through and through.
Sure, sure. We will be meeting on this platform again, and we will be learning many things which you have you being the expert of the subject. So, uh, thank you again, Anshuman ji. Thank you for
Thank you all.
enlightening us.
Thank you again. Thank you as well.
Let us end this
Thank you
session,
all.
and again we will be back with another guest with some informative things to learn about Netaji and the freedom struggle. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you,
Jai
Anshuman.
Hind, Bande Mataram.
Jai Hind.